seems I have a captive audience. I just want to give you a little history of the 20th century in music and music education. I was born at an extraordinarily good time to do all the things that have just been done. I was in high school when the Second World War was on, and a little too young to be drafted into the service. My whole generation ahead of me of young people, 12 of them went overseas, or a lot of them went overseas, 12 of them never came back. So we were close to that. When I finished high school, I went to Toronto to study piano. I'm not sure why, but that's where I was. And I had a marvelous experience. One night I went to a concert in Eaton Auditorium, and sitting on the band, or on the stand, was a band, high school band, gold sousaphones, red jackets, and they played the national anthem, which at that time was God Save the King. And it was the most overwhelming, beautiful sound I had ever heard. At that instant, I became a high school music teacher. If that's what it's all about, that was it. And just by chance, and much of what I'm saying is by chance, the University of Toronto had just started a degree program to train high school music teachers. I knew about it, but I wasn't interested. But I heard that band, and the next day I went down and applied. And you know the rest of that story. I've been very fortunate in my life. I went to Ottawa to teach high school at Nepean High School, and it turned out to be a gem of a school. High academic school, beautiful socioeconomic and so on, and a principal who was dying to have a music program. In fact, he was such that in the second year of the program, with my second year band on a stage, the school had a wonderful auditorium, he came to me and said, "I think your band needs timpani." Now, you don't get a much better principal than that. And I had a marvelous time, and a couple of people who you all know, Jim Davey and Carol Head, were in those classes. Just a few months ago, we had a reunion of the people who were in those classes in 1951 to 55. That's a long time ago. And we had a wonderful reunion with all these grandparents who had been in the high school program. And it was an overwhelming experience, very much like this. That program went very well. And I hit the highlight of my entire career. You've heard that I've had opportunities come up various times, and I'm very happy about those. But the highlight of my entire life is that my high school band won the Ottawa Music Festival in my 5th year. By chance, Earl Terry had a friend in Ottawa, came and heard about our program at Nepean, and he was here in London, the director of music, and this is hard to believe, but southwestern Ontario did not have school music programs yet. Most of the graduates from the University of Toronto stayed in the Toronto area, and some went to the north and so on, but there were very few came to southwestern Ontario. And Earl was anxious to get the music going in the London schools. He convinced me to come to London to do just as I said, to start those programs. That was a huge decision, because my wonderful wife, Wes Ann, and I, and our 3 kids, loved Ottawa. We just built a new house and everything, but we came anyway because the opportunities were so great. I've always been fortunate because Earl did everything. Now you have to remember, this is just after the war. All of Canada was exploding. The vets all came back and were producing kids in volumes. And they were going through the school system. And my career followed that whole business. When I was in the high schools, they were building high schools faster than they could. They were filled with people. Money flowed like water, and everything was first class. And Earl, when I came here, they had just built the first new high school in London, which was Weevil, and that's where Earl wanted to start these music programs. Everything I wanted, he gave me. I've always been blessed with this. We started that program, and within the next few years, those programs flourished in London. One of the people who was part of this whole thing is our dear friend Phil Murphy, who got started at that. 5 years later, and I won't get into this because I don't know much about it, but there was a small music program at Western, which was a BA program within the Faculty of Arts. And the students were getting a very good education. It was primarily arts with studio lessons in piano, voice, and Phil did clarinet, went to Detroit to take the lessons and so on. But these students were seeing what was happening in the schools, and they weren't getting that kind of education. And I don't know what happened, but Don Jones, whom you all know here in London, was part of this. The students made enough fuss about it that the president, Ed Hall, phoned Cliff Van Custer and said, listen, we're going to change this school. I would like you to take over. Cliff Van Custer was a piano teacher at the conservatory. He didn't have a strong academic background, but he was one of the finest pianists in Canada and had a strong background with him. I'm not sure what happened here, but he called me and said, would I come to Western to start this music education program that the students seemed to want. A very tough decision. I loved the schools, the high schools and so on, but I decided that Southwestern Ontario had to start training. So the only other school at that time doing this was Toronto. So I came to Western, and we were the second school in Ontario and Canada to start the music programs that you all know. And Cliff was an extraordinary man. He was a pianist, very quiet, very shy, but he did 2 or 3 things. We worked together for 12 years, and we were as close as 2 brothers can possibly be. He took the lead by working with the administration at the university, and he also was the one who hired the faculty. And he had a very interesting way of doing that. He didn't read their credentials necessarily. He checked to see what kind of people they were. And when Cliff and I started this whole thing, we had 2 goals. One, we wanted to reflect the Canadian context, which wasn't necessarily happening in other schools. And we wanted it to be a very friendly school. Now that sounds kind of platonic, but that's not necessarily the case in all music schools. It can be very competitive, but we didn't want that kind of atmosphere, so it stayed. Anyway, you know the rest of the story. He fired wonderful people, and what he did is he was wonderful at delegating responsibility. And he delegated the responsibility for music and so on. Now you know the rest of the story, so I'm not going to go on. But we've had some fantastic times at Western. I give the credit to where we are today to the fact that the Faculty of Music at Western Ontario has had a slew of extraordinary deans. One of them was Clifford Van Custer, that, as you well know, followed by a man who actually saved the faculty and built it to another high-level thing, Jeff Stokes. And then following him, Bob Wood, who expanded all of the programs. And now, of course, you know our Dean Yonker, who is creating quite an outreach into all the communities, which is why you're here, and is doing a remarkable job like that. We're fortunate we've had that leadership over the last 50 or 60 years. I have to give real credit, and you all know this. I met Wes Anderson in my class at the University of Toronto. She had come from Toronto to that program, and eventually she was unwise enough or whatever to marry me. And I can never figure that out. And as you know, she had an extraordinary career in her own right. She was an amazing woman, amazing talent. She taught strings with me at Weevil when I was there. And then when I opened the program at Western, she came and took over the music education string program and built that. She was a conductor and conducted over 25 of the Gilbert and Sullivan and other program things on the campus. And some of you were strongly influenced by that. But she was also an excellent administrator, and she was asked by the university to take over the University Community Center, which had just been built and needed a strong leader. And they put her in that position to do that, and 5 years later it was that. Unfortunately, she passed away after that, but she had a marvelous career. And between the two of us, we have 3 marvelous kids. They've had wonderful careers of their own, But what I'm most proud of is that